Welcome to the debate. Today we are putting the machinery of the Canadian nation on the table. We're dissecting the engine that drives this country, the federal political system. And the question we're asking is deceptive. It sounds like a civics exam question, but it's actually about the fundamental fairness of your daily life. How effectively does Canada's federal political system govern Canada for all Canadians?
It is the ultimate question, isn't it? And if you ask a room full of political scientists, you'll get a polite nod and a discussion about theory. But if you ask a room full of voters in a swing riding, or better yet, a room of voters in a riding where their party never wins, the answer is usually not effectively at all. The data suggests that governing for all is more of an aspiration, not a reality.
I figured you'd start with the cynicism. But let's look at the canvas we're painting on. We have this iconic image from 1867, the Fathers of Confederation. It's a group of serious-looking men in suits forging a union of 4 colonies. Fast forward to today, and you look at the House of Commons. You see Nancy Caradoc Lindell, the first MP for Nunavut. You see Vivian Barbot, a teacher born in Haiti, rising to speak. The system has successfully transitioned from a rigid colonial pact into a modern, diverse governance machine. My position is that the system works. It balances rep by pop, representation by population, with vital regional protections. It delivers peace, order, and good government, not by accident, but, well, by design.
And I look at those same images and see a coat of paint on a crumbling foundation. Yes, the faces have changed, and thank goodness for that. But the gears, the actual mechanics of how we translate a voter's mark on a ballot into power in Ottawa, are stuck in the 19th century. My position is that we are suffering from deep democratic deficits. We have an electoral system that routinely distorts the will of the people, effectively throwing millions of votes in the trash, and an upper house, the Senate, that is unelected and unaccountable. The system governs, sure, but does it govern for all? The math it says no.
All right, let's open the hood then. When I argue for the effectiveness of the system, I'm talking about structural stability. We rely on 3 branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. It's a classic separation of powers, but the Canadian flavor of it allows for something crucial: decisive action.
Decisive action or unchecked power?
Decisive governance. Let's look at the executive branch, the Prime Minister, and the Cabinet. In our source material, there's a great comic strip titled PM for a Day. It features a young woman who wins a contest and sits in the big chair. Her first instinct is, I'm going to ban gas guzzlers immediately. And her aide has to gently talk her down. It's not that simple.
Because in reality, she'd have the auto lobbyists knocking down her door in 5 minutes.
Well, partly, but mostly because she has to convince her cabinet. This is the first filter. The cabinet ministers who hold specific portfolios like health, finance, or environment, they're the ones who have to implement these laws. They are the reality check. They propose the laws, yes, but they also vet them for feasibility. I mean, this isn't a dictatorship. It's a consensus engine. By the time a policy regarding, say, emission standards reaches the House of Commons, it has already survived the gauntlet of the executive branch. That vetting process prevents rash, populist decisions that could destabilize the economy. It ensures that legislation is serious before it even gets debated.
That's a very charitable interpretation of consensus. Let's look at the reality of that room. Who puts those people in the cabinet? The Prime Minister. He or she selects them. They serve at the PM's pleasure. So if you disagree too loudly with the boss, you aren't in cabinet anymore. But my bigger issue is with the next step, the legislative branch, specifically the House of Commons. This is where the democratic deficit stops being a theory and starts being a math problem.
You're going after first past the post.
I have to. It is the single biggest barrier to the idea that the system works for all Canadians. Under our system, you win a riding, a constituency, by getting more votes than anyone else. You don't need a majority, you just need one more vote than the runner-up.
Which provides a clear, decisive winner for that community.
It provides a winner, but it often manufactures a false majority. Let's just look at the data provided in the text regarding the 2006 federal election in Alberta. This is kind of the smoking gun. In 2006, the Conservative Party won 100% of the seats in Alberta, all 28 ridings. If you looked at a seat map, you'd think every single Albertan voted Conservative.
It was a stronghold, certainly.
But look at the popular vote. They received 65% of the vote. That is a landslide, yes. But it means 35% of Albertans, more than 1 in every 3 people, voted for the Liberals, the NDP, or the Greens. And how many seats did that 35% get? 0. The Green Party specifically got about 6% of the vote across the province. In a proportional system, they might have had 1 or 2 MPs to speak for them. In our system, silence. When you ask if the system governs for all Canadians, how do you answer the 35% of Albertans whose political voice was effectively erased from the legislature?
I think you're conflating representation with proportionality. They aren't the same thing. The Canadian system isn't designed to be a mirror of the national math. It's designed to represent communities. This is the rep by pop concept working at the local level.
But if the community votes 60-40 and the 40 gets nothing, represented is a strong word.
But they are represented. Let's take the example of Deepak Obra, the MP for Calgary East mentioned in the text, or Gary Maristy from Saskatchewan. These aren't just numbers on a scoreboard for a political party. They are human beings with a dual role. Yes, they are legislators who vote on laws, but they are also the voice of their constituents, all of them.
Even the ones who voted against them?
Especially them. If a resident in Calgary East has an issue, maybe a problem with their pension or an immigration file or a federal grant, they call Deepak Obra's office. They don't call the Green Party headquarters in Ottawa. They call their local MP. That MP is accountable to the geography, not just the party ideology. If we move to the system you seem to prefer, where we just tally votes nationally and assign seats, you sever that local connection. You'd have MPs who owe their job to a party list, not to the neighbors in their riding. The current system forces the government to have a physical presence in every single corner of the country.
That's a lovely ideal, the MP as the local ombudsman. But when it comes to the heavy lifting, passing laws, setting budgets, declaring wars, Deepak Obra is going to vote the way his party leader tells him. The local voice is often drowned out by the party whip. And let's talk about the stability argument you made earlier. You claim this system creates decisive government. I'd argue it creates artificial instability.
Artificial instability? We have one of the oldest, most stable, continuous governments in the world.
But look at the concept of the minority government. The text defines this explicitly. A party wins the most seats, but less than 50% of the total. To stay in power, they have to negotiate for support from other parties. The advocate portrays this as a bug. I actually think it's the only time the system works, but the system treats it like a failure. But look at the distortion again in 2008. The Bloc Québécois ran only in Quebec. They got 10% of the national popular vote and won 49 seats. The Green Party ran across the entire country, got 6.8% of the vote, nearly the same amount of actual humans voting for them, and won 0 seats.
You keep coming back to the Greens.
Because it's the clearest example of the failure. 49 voices in Parliament versus 0 voices, for a difference of roughly 3% in the popular vote. That is a structural failure. You cannot tell me the system is effective for that 6.8% of Canadians. They are paying taxes to a government where they have absolutely no one speaking for their specific worldview.
I'd argue that result actually proves the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect regional interests. This is a massive, geographically diverse country. The Bloc vote was concentrated in Quebec. The system rewarded that concentration because it gave Quebec a strong voice. The Green vote was diffuse, spread thin like butter over too much bread. The Canadian system prioritizes the idea that regions need to be heard to prevent the massive population centers, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, from completely dominating the political landscape. If we went purely by numbers, rural Saskatchewan and the North would be politically irrelevant. The current system ensures they have seats at the table.
If we want to talk about regional protection, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the Senate.
I knew we were going there.
We have to. You claim the system is effective. How can you defend a legislative body in the 21st century that is appointed, not elected? Senators are chosen by the Prime Minister. They can stay in office until they are 75 years old. They are accountable to no one, not the voters, not the provinces, really only to their own conscience. The text mentions Bert Brown from Alberta. He spent 20 years campaigning for an elected Senate, the Triple E Senate, because he viewed the current setup as fundamentally illegitimate. Even when he was eventually appointed, the irony wasn't lost on him.
I understand the Democratic purist argument. It feels wrong on paper. But we are debating effectiveness, and I argue that the Senate's lack of election is actually its superpower.
Its superpower is that nobody voted for them?
Exactly. Because they don't have to worry about the next election cycle, they don't have to kiss babies or run attack ads, they can provide what the Constitution calls sober second thought. They can look at a bill that the House of Commons passed in a rush of populist fervor and say, wait a minute, does this actually work? Is this fair? They represent the interests of Canada's regions and, crucially, Canada's minorities.
Sober second thought is a fantastic branding slogan. But does it actually happen, or is it just a retirement home for party loyalists?
It happens. Look at the evidence in the text regarding Senator Jean-Robert Gauthier. He was appointed to represent Ontario, but his specific passion was Francophone rights. When the Hôpital 4 in Ottawa, a vital institution for the Francophone community, was threatened with closure by the provincial government, who stood up? It wasn't just the local MPs who were juggling a dozen other issues. It was Senator Gauthier. He spearheaded the fight. He used his position, his time, and his insulation from electoral politics to champion a minority right.
That is a noble example, I admit.
It's a system working. An elected MP driven by the majority population in a riding which might be English-speaking might not have fought that battle. It wouldn't have been political suicide to ignore it, maybe, but it wouldn't have been a priority. But a senator whose role is specifically defined to protect minority language rights in regions did the work. The Constitution divided Senate seats, Maritimes, Ontario, Quebec, the West, to ensure no region could steamroll the others. It's a check on the tyranny of the majority.
But that check is flawed because of the origin of the senators. You mentioned the PM for a day comic earlier. The text also asks a very pointed inference question. What factors do you think the Prime Minister takes into account when appointing the members of Cabinet and, by extension, the Senate? The answer isn't just merit. It's partisanship, it's patronage.
Politics is part of the political system, yes.
But if the Prime Minister controls the House through a majority and then he appoints the senators who are supposed to check him, where is the check? It's a rubber stamp. The Senate rarely rejects bills. They might make amendments, little tweaks here and there, but they almost never say, no, this is wrong. So we have this massive, expensive machinery that claims to be a safeguard, but it's staffed by the friends of the person in power. That isn't a check, it's an echo chamber.
They rarely reject bills because the system emphasizes consensus before it gets to that point. It's subtle, not combative. But if you want a hard, unyielding check on power, you're looking at the wrong building. You need to look at the judicial branch, the Supreme Court of Canada.
Now on this, we might find some common ground. The judiciary is independent.
It is the ultimate safeguard. We have the testimony of Mr. Justice Frank Ikabuchi in the source material. He explicitly states, we are judges, we are not politicians. That distinction is vital. Their role is to interpret and apply the law, specifically the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They have the power to strike down laws that violate the Constitution, no matter how popular those laws are with the voters or the Prime Minister.
True.
The text notes they deal with issues of equality, discrimination, criminal process. This is where the rights of the all are truly protected. If the majority in the House wants to pass a law that discriminates against a specific group, the Supreme Court says no. That is effective governance. It protects the minority from the tyranny of the majority far better than any electoral reform could.
The judiciary is essential, and I'm glad we have it, but remember, they only interpret the laws that the other two branches create. They are the referees, but they don't write the rulebook. And if the rulebook is being written by a system that lacks accountability, the judges can only do so much. Let's talk about that accountability, or the lack thereof.
I think the system is incredibly accountable.
Is it?
The executive branch, the PM and the cabinet, holds an immense amount of power. The PM decides the portfolios. Did you know the environment portfolio didn't even exist until 1971? Prime Minister Trudeau created it.
Which shows the system adapting. Pollution became a concern, so the machine evolved to address it.
It shows adaptability, sure, but it also shows that the priorities of the entire government are entirely defined by one person's decisions on how to structure the cabinet. And when that power is abused, what happens? The text discusses the sponsorship scandal. This was a massive failure of governance, millions of dollars misappropriated, government spending run amok.
It was a dark chapter, absolutely. But what happened next? Did the government collapse into anarchy? No. The system corrected itself. In response to that scandal, the government passed the Federal Accountability Act in 2006.
A lock on the barn door after the horse was gone.
But look at the process. It wasn't a knee-jerk decree. The bill went through first reading, introduction, second reading, debate on the principle, committee stage, where it was studied in detail, witnesses called, clauses analyzed, report stage, third reading, and then the same process in the Senate. Finally, royal assent.
You're describing a bureaucracy, not a moral victory.
I'm describing a rigorous democratic process. The act increased protection for whistleblowers, civil servants who report wrongdoing, and tightened rules on lobbyists. This proves that when the system fails, the democratic mechanisms exist to repair it. The system is self-healing.
That is a compelling narrative, but let's look at the lobbyist part of that act. The material notes that lobbyists are people paid to influence MPs. They have to register now, sure, but the industry hasn't disappeared. In fact, it's bigger than ever.
They are part of the information ecosystem. They represent industries, charities, NGOs.
They represent money. Go back to your PM for a day example. The student wants to ban gas guzzlers. The response is, it's not that simple. Why? Because of competing interests. And often, the interests with the best-paid lobbyists win. The Accountability Act was a band-aid. The structural vulnerability is that access to the executive branch is still a game of who you know. The average Canadian doesn't have a lobbyist. The oil industry does. The pharmaceutical industry does. So when we ask, does it govern for all Canadians? The answer is, it governs for those who can afford to be heard.
I think that's too cynical. Lobbyists also represent the Cancer Society. They represent student unions. They represent indigenous groups. It's a way to organize voices. But stepping back to the big picture, I look at the diversity of the House today compared to 1867. I see MPs representing First Nations, like Gary Maristy. I see MPs who came as refugees, like Rahim Jaffer. I see a system that allows for a minority government to function by forcing parties to negotiate. It is messy, yes. Democracy is inherently messy, but it is robust. It has weathered wars, depressions, and referendums.
And I look at that same diversity, and I see it as a veneer over a structural problem. Yes, there are diverse MPs, and that is progress. But when you have a system where a party can get a majority of the power with only 39 or 40% of the vote, which happens frequently, you are mathematically guaranteeing that the majority of Canadians are being governed by a party they didn't choose. That isn't peace, order, and good government. That is order over representation.
But is the alternative better? A paralyzed legislature fractured into a dozen tiny parties where nothing gets done because everyone is waiting for a perfect consensus? Our system prioritizes action. It prioritizes the ability to govern.
It prioritizes the comfort of the status quo.
I think we are reaching the crux of the disagreement here. To summarize my perspective, the Canadian federal political system is effective because it blends democratic responsiveness with structural stability. The House represents the people through local ridings, ensuring every community, not just the big cities, has a voice. The Senate, though appointed, uses that independence to protect minorities and regions in ways elected officials sometimes can't. And the executive has the power to act decisively, checked by a rigorous judicial branch. The evolution from the 1867 compact to the modern parliament is proof that the machinery works.
And to summarize my position, the system functions, but it functions with a limp. It is plagued by democratic deficits that we cannot ignore. The first-past-the-post system disenfranchises millions of voters whose choices do not translate into seats. The executive branch concentrates too much power in the hands of the Prime Minister, who appoints the very people supposed to check him in the Senate. While the judiciary remains a bright spot, the political branches struggle to truly claim they speak for all Canadians when the electoral math so frequently distorts the popular will.
It is certainly not a simple issue. As the comic says, governing is not that simple. It requires balancing the need for action with the need for consultation. It's a constant tension between efficiency and fairness.
On that, we can agree. It is a complex machine, and whether it works effectively for you might depend entirely on which riding you live in, who you cast your ballot for, and whether your candidate actually made it to Ottawa.
We encourage you to look at the results in your own riding. Don't just look at who won. Look at the margin. Look at the voter turnout. See who represents you.
And ask yourself, is your voice actually being heard in that chamber? Or are you just part of the statistical noise?
Thank you for listening to The Debate.
Thank you.